Well, as you get to be a grown-up, you realize you can't do everything in life, that you're going to have to make a living, right? You're going to have to become somebody who contributes to society, and usually that means narrowing it down to one job or one profession or one career, one way of being. When I started going to college, when I began thinking about who would I be in society, I felt like, well, there are two things I love the most. I love to do the most. One of them is being out in nature, climbing trees and being with trees, and I really started realizing that science is a pretty cool way to understand the world. But the other part of me was modern dance. I love dance. Ever since I was 4 years old, my parents gave me these wonderful modern dance lessons. I had a fantastic teacher named Erica Timai. She taught us about creativity. She taught us about movement, about the dynamics of the body, about, in ballet, you're more sort of restrained with certain movements that you have to do. But in modern dance, you can express ideas through movement. And that's what I loved best. And so there I was at college. I double majored in modern dance and in biology. And when I was graduating from college, I realized I'm going to have to make a choice. I do not think it's going to be possible to be both a biologist and a modern dancer, because both of those professions really take like your full being, your full work time, your full 24 hours a day. So I had to make a decision. So how do you make a decision? Well, you don't just for something as important as your life work, you don't want to make a random decision. You don't want to say gee, I think I'll just roll a dice and make a choice. No, what you want to do is collect information about it, right? But when you're in college, you don't really get a chance to actually be a biologist. You might take a biology class or take a biology lab, but you're not really being a biologist. Same with modern dance. You're taking modern dance classes, you're doing little performances for the college, but you're not really being a dancer. So it seemed to me very important to try out both of those in as real a way as possible before I made a decision. So in my last year of college, I started writing letters to field biology stations all over the world. I wrote about 60 letters. I had to print them out. There was no email, there was no electronic mail. So I wrote these letters, put them in envelopes, and sent them off to all these field stations saying, I would love to be your field assistant. I don't need much money. You don't really have to pay me very much. And I would just like to have the experience of being a biologist. And I got back one response, and it said, well, if you can make your way out to Papua New Guinea, you can be my field assistant. Papua New Guinea is this obscure Pacific island, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and this field station was in the middle of this remote Pacific island. And this field station was called the WOW Ecology Institute. And the guy who wrote me back was the director of it. His name was Dr. Gressett. He was about 70 years old. He studied beetles. He was an entomologist. And he needed a field assistant to sort of follow him around and collect the host plants that his beetles were eating. So I was that field assistant. So I went to Alaska, I earned money, I put it in the savings account, I got an airplane ticket to Papua New Guinea, and I spent a year there. And it was this tiny little field institute. There were 3 or 4 other biologists and Dr. Gressett. And Dr. Gressett would take me all over this amazing island. We would meet villagers who really had never seen white people before. We would collect his beetles, my plants, and I just learned what is the life of a field biologist. And I loved it. The other biologists were so friendly and sharing of their knowledge. We were experiencing amazing people, amazing birds of paradise, amazing beetles, amazing everything. And there was a sense of contribution, a sense that what the papers that Dr. Gressett was going to write, he would publish, and it would add to the scientific record of understanding the beetles that lived on this island. It was like a contribution to the world forever. And I thought, that is a really great thing to do. So that was my year in Papua New Guinea. And I loved it, waved them goodbye. But then it was time to travel and try out. It was time to try out what is the life of a modern dancer. So I flew to Paris. My sister happened to be living there. I had made contact with a dance studio that said, well, if you would like to show up, we could consider your joining us. It was called Danse Paris. And I lived in Paris. I lived in this little attic apartment for a year, and I went to the studio, and I went to museums, and I sort of interacted with all these French people and all the culture. You know, I ate baguettes and went to bakeries and lived the life of a city person and lived the life of somebody who was making life a life of dance. And after that year, I said, well, it is time to decide what you want to do. So I went to a little cafe. I got a little corner table. I ordered a pot of tea, and I sat there with all of my journals, all the journals that I had kept during my year in Papua New Guinea, my year in Paris, France. I read through them all, and then I made my decision. And it was field biology. My experience that year showed me that I loved being in this remote place. I loved not living in a city. I loved the people I was working with who were so generous with sharing what they knew and that they were making contributions in a real way. And in contrast, even though I love modern dance, and I still love modern dance because of its expression and what it does for people when they watch modern dance, I didn't like living in a city. I didn't like living in a big city. I didn't like living so crowded and so far away from wilderness. And the people that were in the dance troupe were more sort of competitive. They weren't sharing. They wanted the best roles, and so we would have to compete with them. And also, I realized the career of a modern dancer is very short. You know, by the time you're 30, like, that's it. And then what do you do after that? And whereas Dr. Gresset, he was 70 years old and he was still going strong. So all of those things went into my decision of saying, yes, I love modern dance, but I'm going to choose to be a field ecologist. I think it is a hard thing to make a big decision that, you know, you think is going to last the rest of your life. And it really is hard, either because you don't know what you want to do, or like you want to do too many things. You've got lots of things that you want to do and you don't know which ones to choose. So my central advice is, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You'll always have the opportunity to change that choice or make a different choice. I mean, certainly one choice leads to another, which leads to another. So it's important to think about, but one choice does not lock you in. And this relates to my theory about life choices and life pathways, which I call the meatball theory. Yes. So very often you say, oh, well, what pathway are you going to choose for your life? Are you going to choose the pathway of motherhood, or of being a scientist, or being a business person? As if, you know, life is only a single path that you just take one step after another. And, you know, for some people that is true. A pathway works. Like my brother, for example, he is a doctor. He's always wanted to be a doctor, so he majored in biology, he went to medical school, and he is now a fantastic doctor. That is a pathway. They told him what classes to take and what you have to do to become a doctor. On the other hand, there are many people, and many creative people, who really don't follow a given pathway. And for those people, I think the pathway model doesn't work. I see their lives, and my life for that matter, as this big pot of hot spaghetti sauce in which there are these meatballs that are moving around. And here you are at meatball A, being very observant. You're watching closely about other opportunities that might come around. So here's meatball B, like an internship, or, you know, maybe a summer job or something. And you think, should I take that summer job or not? You look at it, you think about it, and you have the choice to jump onto meatball B, or to say, nah, I'm going to wait for another opportunity, another possible summer job. So you stay on meatball A until meatball C comes around. And then you can jump on that one. And after you're on C, say you chose that one, then there's going to be meatball D and meatball E and F. And so all these meatballs are floating around in this sauce, and you have the choice about whether you take that or not. And you have the knowledge that if you don't take that, there might be some other meatball that comes by. So that's how I've lived my life. It's both choice and chance. You know, there was an opportunity to get a job for my first professor job, and I had to say, should I take that professor job or not? And I did take that first professor job. But then there was another opportunity. Should I, you know, well, you can make this true of people too. Like, well, I've had a lot of boyfriends, and here comes Jack, who I ended up marrying. Should I jump on that meatball, or should I wait for some other meatball? So all of this is to say that making one choice doesn't mean that you're ingrained in that pathway forever. There will always be other choices. I mean, some people have more choices than others, but we all have choices.